Greetings friends, I'm Darth Castigus. This is the first in a series of videos I call Fire Kennedy, Hire Me. In it, I'll be taking a deep dive into the unmitigated disaster that is Disney Star Wars. Unlike other YouTubers and critics, I will not only be breaking down the seemingly endless list of mistakes, I'll be presenting solutions and a direction forward for Star Wars that will actually work. And yes, I'll gladly take Kennedy's job. Especially since very few, if any, good directors or producers in Hollywood will touch it now that it's so toxic. I believe Disney was doomed from the beginning. Simply put, Bob Iger was so focused on acquiring Lucasfilm that he hadn't considered what to do with it once he got it. Add to this the fact that George's hand-picked successor doesn't know the first thing about Star Wars, or even how to make a successful film on her own, and you have a recipe for disaster. And oh, what a disaster it turned out to be. The sheer galactic magnitude of buffoonery that went into destroying Star Wars is truly mind-blowing. It's a tale of sorrow and woe that's truly epic in its scope, and all of it was completely predictable and completely avoidable. And now that it's all over, I can finally tell the full story of the annihilation of the most beloved and profitable franchise in history. Due to the breadth of things I need to cover, this will be the first in a series of videos. In this video, I'll go into the troubled history of Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm and how the seeds of failure were planted. I'm not going into detail dissecting the films themselves, as that has been done so beautifully by other people. I'll post links to Mauler's epic takedown of the Disney Star Wars films. When you're done with this tale, go check out his masterclass in film criticism. So my friends, sit back, grab your favorite drink, and let me regale you with the tragic tale of Darth Kennedy the Incompetent. I have said before that Kathleen Kennedy failed in every way that a president of a major corporation can fail. She has cost Lucasfilm and Disney billions in her 10 years as president of Lucasfilm. A monumental fuck-up of this scale would surely have gotten any man fired in short order. But alas, Kathleen is no man. The destruction of Star Wars began immediately after Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm with the destruction of the EU. What is the expanded universe, you ask? Well, the last of the original trilogy, Return of the Jedi, came out in 1983. Throughout the rest of the 80s, there were some made-for-TV movies, none of them any good, 2 cartoons that were passable, and a handful of novels nobody remembers, and a short-lived Marvel comic series. This is where gamers come in. In 1987, West End Games published the first edition of the Star Wars role-playing game. To do this, they needed to fill out a lot of backstory and history in order to flesh out the galaxy of Star Wars into a playable setting. They also had to make sure that everything was consistent and at least made some kind of sense. For example, the Arabic alphabet was originally just random characters, but the authors made it into a workable alphabet, and would later be used in the prequel trilogies. Yes, you can actually read everything that's on screen. The game was so well done that the books were canonized. It was a hit with fans, allowing them to create their own alter egos and play out their fantasies alongside Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. It is still, in my opinion, one of the best role-playing systems ever developed, and I've played a lot of systems over the years. But I also might be biased. Despite the success of the Star Wars role-playing game, Star Wars just wasn't high in the public consciousness anymore. The force had faded, so to speak. By 1990, Lucasfilm had moved on to other projects like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Howard the Duck. Due in part to the success of the Star Wars role-playing game, Lucasfilm began an ambitious project. The aim was to expand the Star Wars universe in novels and comics. In 1990, award-winning sci-fi novelist Timothy Zahn was given a full set of the books from the role-playing game. He used them as a reference for a little novel called Heir to the Empire. Set 5 years after Return of the Jedi, Heir to the Empire was an instant bestseller. It was followed in 1992 by Dark Force Rising, and in 1993 by The Last Command. And all of them were bestsellers. Star Wars was back, and the EU was launched. The trilogy became known as the Thrawn Trilogy, named after the main antagonist. It continued the story of Luke, Han, and Leia in the aftermath of the Battle of Endor. The shattered remains of the Empire, now known as the Imperial Remnant, have been driven to the far reaches of the galaxy. What was once a unified power has fractured into multiple small territories run by former Moffs, planetary governors, and military warlords. Kinda sounds like The Mandalorian, doesn't it? I wonder why that is. Anyway, the fledgling New Republic was struggling to reunite a fractured galaxy and take as many planets back from the Empire by peaceful means as possible. Luke Skywalker is now the last Jedi. A galactic hero and probably the most recognizable face in the galaxy. He's more recognizable than Santa Claus. Seriously, he can't go anywhere without being recognized. He has been combing the galaxy for information on the Jedi. Sound familiar? Han and Leia are married, and Leia is expecting their first children, powerful twins named Jason and Jaina. These kids will become powerful and pivotal characters later. But for now, just know the entire idea of Ben Solo in the Disney trilogy was outright stolen from Jason Solo's story, only it didn't come out nearly as good. So why didn't they just use Jason's story? Who knows? It would have been a hell of a lot better than Ben Solo. But more on that later. Oh, and did I mention that Leia started her Jedi training? Yeah, she was Luke's first student. Han insisted. Lando is deep into a new business venture. He wasn't just conveniently forgotten like he was in the Disney trilogy. You know, for a twit who's so obsessed with diversity, you'd think that Kathleen would have insisted that Lando be included in all 3 films. Well, I guess it doesn't matter if you're the only black main character in Star Wars if you're not a woman. The Force is female after all. Chewie, 3PO, and R2 are exactly where you'd expect them to be. The main villain is the cunning and ruthless Grand Admiral Thrawn, a blue-skinned chiss from the Outer Rim and the only non-human to attain the rank of Grand Admiral. He is reuniting the Imperial Remnant and preparing to crush the rebellion once and for all. He was an instant hit with fans, so much so that he was recanonized after being included in the Rebels cartoon series, and Disney has been cashing in on him ever since. The books also introduce us to Mara Jade, a former personal assassin and spy for Emperor Palpatine. Spoiler alert, she eventually becomes Luke Skywalker's wife, and they have a son. His name is Ben, because, you know, Luke had a meaningful relationship with Ben Kenobi, so naming his son after his mentor makes sense. Unlike, say, Ben Solo. Long story short, Heir to the Empire was a smash hit with the fans and launched the entire expanded universe. Fans have wanted to see these books made into films since they first started. Sadly, that was not to be. About this time, Dark Horse Comics acquired the license for Star Wars from Marvel and launched the Dark Empire series. It was set a few years after the Thrawn trilogy, and the popular series told the story of the resurrection of Emperor Palpatine using clone bodies. It also told the story of Luke's fall to the dark side and his eventual redemption by Leia. Where have I seen that idea terribly rehashed lately? The story was later decanonized for the same reason that Rise of Skywalker utterly fails in the very first seconds of the film. The Return of the Emperor destroys any meaning to Luke and Vader's story arcs in the original trilogy. In the end, Rey Palpatine goes on to destroy the Star Wars canon and George Lucas's legacy in one fell swoop. Throughout the life of the EU, Lucasfilm tried very hard to maintain continuity and logical progression. They didn't always succeed, but they did make it work more often than not. Alan Cush, Lucasfilm's continuity editor at the time, was quoted in 1996 as saying that the premise of all the comic books, novels, games, and other spin-off works is that they all work chronologically, that the continuity forms one unbroken story. Since our movies have their own internal continuity, we maintain that in the spin-off works. Technically, George Lucas has been doing continuity all along by mapping out the 9 films. But it wasn't until 1991 when Timothy Zahn wrote the novel Heir to the Empire, the first Star Wars bestseller, which was the beginning of what we call the Star Wars Renaissance, that continuity became an issue. Over the course of the next 20-plus years, the EU would publish thousands of novels, comics, and young adult books, as well as multiple role-playing video and board games, as well as supplements for multiple systems and multiple publishers. The timeline of events after Return of the Jedi progressed at roughly real time. This means that the main actors from the original trilogy, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford, were all about the same age as their characters at any given point in time. Stick a pin in that, it will be important later. The EU would explore not only the time after the original trilogy, but even go back thousands of years to explore the Old Republic in its heyday. It would explore the Sith Empire and the origins of the Sith and the Jedi, and even jump ahead a century and tell the story of a resurgent empire battling the New Republic that was trying to put itself back together after Jason Solo broke it apart. After the release of the prequels, the EU would explore the Old Republic and the Clone Wars, both on-screen and off. Keep this in mind, it'll be important too. By this point, myself and other fans had played and run most of the board games and role-playing games. We've read the novels and read the comics. Hundreds of new characters have been introduced, and smaller parts from the original trilogies, like Wedge and Tilly's, had had their characters developed and expanded extremely well. They'd become real players on the galactic stage. So the EU and Star Wars chugged along happily for 21 years. And then this happened. Disney buys Lucasfilm for $4 billion. Wait, what?
You know, I made the decision to sell the company, the Star Wars. I made that decision because I looked at the future. I looked at the fact that I was going to have a baby. I looked at the fact that I was married. And I looked at the fact that I wanted to build a museum. And I looked at the fact that I wanted to make experimental films. So my life was going on a different track. I noticed the last few movies that I'd made were costing the company a lot of money. And I didn't think that was fair to the people that worked there or the company.
Today, I am proud to announce the Walt Disney Company is acquiring Lucasfilm, the global entertainment company founded by George Lucas and the home of the legendary Star Wars franchise. In addition to getting the rights to one of the greatest family franchises and epic stories of all time, Disney is also acquiring all of Lucasfilm's operating businesses, including Industrial Light and Magic and Skywalker Sound. The Star Wars universe now has more than 17,000 characters inhabiting several thousand planets and spanning 20,000 years. And this gives Disney infinite inspiration and opportunities to continue the epic Star Wars saga. We're thrilled that George has entrusted the future of his extraordinary legacy to the Walt Disney Company and recognize what an honor it is.
All right, hold on. The maverick from San Francisco, George Lucas, the most successful independent filmmaker in history, is selling his life's work to fucking Disney. Disney. The biggest media conglomerate in history, Disney. Disney is everything George Lucas had hated about the corporate studio system his entire life, and he's selling them Lucasfilm? Oh, good God. This can't be true. Seriously, I was in shock. I just could not wrap my head around this. I thought it had to be a publicity stunt. And only $4 billion? That's it? It's fucking Star Wars. It's the most valuable IP ever. ILM alone is worth almost that much. But oh, it gets worse. The same day the Star Wars YouTube channel posted the video of Bob Iger announcing Lucasfilm's purchase, it also posted an interview with Kathleen Kennedy and George Lucas talking about the future of Star Wars.
Obviously, I've been talking about retiring for several years now. I wanted to get into sort of another stage of life where I'm not in the film business anymore and I don't have to run a corporation. And it occurred to me one day that the perfect person to take over the company was Kathy. It's just such a perfect fit. And I felt that I really wanted to put the company somewhere in a larger entity which would protect it. Disney is a huge corporation. They have all kinds of capabilities and facilities, so that there's a lot of strength that is gained by this. The great thing about Disney, again, as we were saying before, is that, you know, it's between the parks and all the things they've got going. It's great that we have a chance probably to expand that, and you know, there's lots and lots of opportunities at Disney that we wouldn't have at any other studio.
Okay, so George handpicked his successor, a woman that he's worked with for 40 years. Okay. Fine. Makes sense. I assumed that she was intimately familiar with the EU and Star Wars in general. No, she was not. She had no clue. And she still doesn't to this day. George has also apparently worked with Disney for many years. Maybe he knows something I don't. Maybe there's a plan. Nope. No, there was never a plan. Despite Disney's PR spin to the contrary, I've suspected this for years. Hell, anyone even remotely paying attention saw it, and now we have confirmation. But don't take my word for it. Let's hear what Disney CEO Bob Iger had to say about it in his autobiography, The Ride of a Lifetime. When we projected what we might do if we owned them, which was pure conjecture, we guessed we could produce and release a Star Wars film every other year for the first 6 years after acquiring them, but it would take us time to get started, since we didn't detect anything was in development. Oh, my head hurts. Iger was so eager to snatch up Lucasfilm that he had spent billions of dollars on it and had no fucking idea what to do with it. What the ever-loving fuck? Let's just call this astounding fuck-up number 1, okay? Must be nice to have that kind of throwaway money. So anyway...
Well, I always said I wasn't going to do any more, and that's true, because I'm not going to do any more. But that doesn't mean I'm unwilling to turn it over to Kathy to do more. I have story treatments of 7, 8, and 9 and a bunch of other movies, and obviously we have hundreds of books and comics and everything you could possibly imagine. So, you know, I sort of moved that treasure trove of stories and various things to Kathy, and, you know, I have complete confidence that she's going to take them and make great movies.
Now, I'll admit, I was really excited to think that we're going to get new Star Wars films and finally see some of the most beloved characters from the EU come to life on screen. I wanted to see characters like Mara Jade, Ahsoka Tano, Kip Duran, Corran Horn, Jason and Jaina Solo, and many more. To the fans of Star Wars, the future looked bright. We didn't know about the shit show behind the scenes yet. So, just like everybody else, I waited with bated breath to see what was going to happen.
We are absolutely going to make Star Wars movies, and we're in the midst of the really fun part of the process, which is we're sitting down with a couple of writers and we're starting to discuss ideas and we're starting to talk about what those stories might be. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to be entirely on my own, because it's important that he at least continue to be the little guardian angel on my shoulder, helping me do this.
They're finishing the hologram now. Don't worry.
Yeah. My Yoda has to be there.
I'm doing this so that the films will have a longer life, and so that more fans and people can enjoy them into the future. It's a very big universe I've created, and there's a lot of stories that are sitting in there.
The main thing is to protect these characters, make sure that they still continue to live in the way that you created them, and that the universe of Star Wars continues to grow.
Okay, so Kennedy has the entirety of the EU in her possession. She has promised to protect George's legacy, and he's going to be involved as an advisor. Okay, maybe this will work out. Maybe this will be good. One of the first things Kennedy does is form the Lucasfilm Story Group. Ostensibly, the goal of the group was to create a path for Star Wars going forward. Presumably, they would be using a wealth of stories and material bequeathed by George to Kennedy and Disney. It made sense. You can't directly adapt most books, since film and books are completely different mediums, but it can be done. You would need people to do that, people who were competent and talented and knew what they were doing. Unfortunately, what we got was a group of diversity hires and no actual talent. If the story group had any understanding of Star Wars at all, they would have recognized they already had a solid story base and a dedicated fan base to go with it. All they had to do was adopt the already existing material to screen. Not only would this guarantee an audience, but it would cut the story group's workload in half, since these stories have already proven their commercial success. So long as the films were even halfway passable, longtime fans would flock to the theaters to finally see their beloved EU characters brought to life alongside the original cast. And as a bonus, the EU already had all the diversity that Hollywood's been trying to push on us for the last several years. And then, astounding fuck-up number 2 happens. Fuck. The EU is completely scrapped. Why? Why would you do such a fucking idiotic thing? Do you not realize that almost every single successful franchise of the past 10 to 15 years has been based off of a novel or comic series? This little factoid shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, especially people in Hollywood.
The audience is so smart. And it's true. They are. They get everything.
The most successful franchises, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Marvel, X-Men, both original and first class, Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, Spider-Man, are all based on novels and comics. In the cases of Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, they follow the books quite closely. The rest mostly follow the pre-existing source material from literally decades of comics. They all took great pains to remain true to the source material, for the most part, and were rewarded with great financial success, fan love, and often critical acclaim. Not that critics matter anymore, but that's another video entirely. Even the smaller franchises like Hunger Games, the Bourne series, Twilight, and 50 Shades of Grey did this. In fact, the only truly original film franchise to be successful in the last 20 years was Fast and Furious. Even Mission Impossible is a reboot of an old TV show. Hell, even Game of Thrones pulled this off in a television format. Well, that is, until they ran out of books to adapt.
That is one big pile of shit.
Which just proves my point. Hollywood can't write anything anymore without being spoon-fed by much better writers. On the upside, D&D had the good grace to own up to themselves being hacks, which is more than I can say for Kathleen and the Lucasfilm Story Group. Finish the books, Martin. That's all we're asking. Because of this respect for and loyalty to the source material, every one of these franchises had an instant built-in audience. By remaining true to and respecting the source material, they kept the fans coming back happily, time and time again. And most importantly, and this cannot be overstated, those fans buy merch. Lots and lots of merchandise. Toys, clothing, videos, home decor, soundtracks, you name it. Fans love to spend money on their passions. Cosplay. Check out the cosplay. Hardcore fans make stupid decisions and spend money they don't have on shit they don't need all the time simply because their love of a fandom. I know this from experience because I am just as guilty of this as everyone else. So why the hell would you do something so stupid, so asinine, so completely beyond comprehension as to burn literally decades of great writing and torpedo your already existing fan base by burning everything? Oh yeah, and then turn around and attack the fans and blame them for it. This is the point where Bob Iger should have fired Kathleen Kennedy immediately.
You're fired!
But lacking the courage to do the right thing because he didn't want to be seen as the man to fire the highest paid woman in Disney, he let her stay on so that she could run Star Wars into the ground. This fateful bout of abject stupidity marked the end of Star Wars. Bob Iger and Kennedy had just declared that their woke SJW agenda was more important than their promise to George Lucas and Kennedy's responsibilities as president of Lucasfilm. Not to mention Lucasfilm's responsibility to the fans. She has pushed ma diversità on a film franchise that has more diversity since 1977 than every single woke piece of garbage that has come out of Hollywood to date. Seriously, she thought a universe populated with literally hundreds of sentient alien species and cultures needed more diversity. I have a responsibility to the company I work with. I don't feel that I have a responsibility to cater in some way. I would just never seize on saying, well, this is a franchise that's appealed primarily to men for many, many years, and therefore I owe men something.
That is why you fail.
No, Kathleen, you really do owe us something. You pretty much owe us everything, in fact. The majority of Star Wars fans have always been men, mostly white men. They are the people that have been spending their money for decades on Star Wars novels, merchandise, and toys. Their money is the reason that Star Wars is the biggest and most valuable IP in the world. And you, because of being blinded by your idiotic politics, have completely missed the obvious. Which brings me to the second most obvious reason for trashing the EU. Money. All Bob Iger and Disney care about is money. Well, money in their political agenda, I suppose. They couldn't care less about respecting George's legacy, story, the fans, story, quality filmmaking, story, or the fans. Notice how I said story and fans multiple times? This is important because fans come for the story. No good story, no fans. No fans, no ticket and merchandise sales. It's that simple. If you want to make money with Star Wars, you need to have great characters and great story. If you do that, the money is guaranteed. Are you listening, Kathy? It doesn't get any clearer than that. Also, if rumors are to be believed, one of the main reasons for incinerating the greatest treasure trove of stories that they're ever going to find is the simple fact that Disney doesn't want to pay the required royalties to the writers from the EU. There it is. It's that simple. It's just purely greed. Ironically, they would have made billions more if they just kept the EU, hired competent writers and directors, and done the right thing in the first place, even while paying their royalties. There's also a rumor that George Lucas himself still retains a 25% royalty on all the currently existing characters. That would mean that Disney would owe George 25% of the profits from everything they did with the characters of George's films or the EU. Again, this is a rumor, but if true, things start to make a lot more sense. This would explain creating a whole new main cast, not using more than a few of the original characters in any one film, and then killing those characters off as fast as possible.
It's time to let old things die. Skywalker. The Sith, the Jedi, the rebels, let it all die.
Don't do this, Ben. Please don't go this way.
No, you're still holding on! Let go! Sam, you have no place in this story. You're nothing.
This has apparently been Disney's guiding principle from the beginning. Screw the fans. You'll buy whatever crap we put out. As long as it says Star Wars on it, you're gonna love it. The problem is, all of Disney's characters are garbage and nobody gives a shit about them. Which brings me to the third most obvious reason for scrapping the EU. Separating Disney Star Wars from actual Star Wars. Some would call this a strategic choice for the reasons I stated previously. In some cases, this does make sense. However, this is not one of those cases. You cannot separate the name Star Wars from the characters and the stories in it. Anyone with half a brain can see this for the utter idiocy that it is. Well, anyone now working for Disney, or the shill media at least. The last reason Disney Lucasfilm did the ultimate stupid is because Kathleen Kennedy claimed that she wanted to make new filmmakers free from the restrictions of George's work so that they can have creative freedom with the new films and give us something fresh and new, something we've never seen before.
The fans really don't want to know. You want to go into the theater and be surprised and see things for the first time and hear new things and see new characters, and you don't want every single thing revealed.
Sure thing, Kathy. We believe you. The story of Luke Skywalker is the quintessential hero's journey. It's a timeless tale passed down for generations. Star Wars has become our modern mythos. It's our tale of Ulysses, our Beowulf. It's timeless. This was George's intention from the very beginning.
It's based on human behavior, human psychology, mythology, which is the sort of archaeology of human behavior and thinking. And since it has those motifs, it is very universal, and everybody can relate to it.
This is important because it's the reason Star Wars has endured all these years. It's the reason it has, had, legions of loyal fans the world over. It's relatable. You don't have to be a young boy to relate to Luke Skywalker. You don't have to be a young girl to relate to Princess Leia. These characters are timeless archetypes. We all understand them to some degree, almost instinctively. We don't need to see ourselves represented to get it. We empathize with them and understand the message on an almost instinctive level. That's just how the human mind works. Sadly, this level of storytelling is so far beyond Hollywood at this point that they might as well be trying to reach not just for the stars, but for a galaxy far, far away. This problem doesn't just infect Star Wars. Just look at how far Star Trek and Doctor Who have fallen in the past couple of years. Each of them had got woke and gone broke. Forced diversity and the expense of actual storytelling ability never works. Never. It seems that, in the beginning at least, Kennedy understood this.
The main thing is to protect these characters, make sure that they still continue to live in the way that you created them.
Fuck you, Kathy.
These are my kids. So
all those Star Wars films.
All the Star Wars films.
They were your kids.
Yeah, well, they are right. I loved them. I created them. I'm very intimately involved in them, and obviously to
and
sell
you
them
sold
off.
them.
I sold them to the white slavers that take these things and.
Okay, but I mean.
Yes, George. Yes, you did. You were also betrayed by someone you obviously trusted very deeply. Someone that you had once considered a friend.
The whole notion of dark and light and the idea that everybody recognizes the choices they make throughout their life can be influenced, even within themselves, to that degree, that I think that that's fascinating. I mean, we're used to seeing stories about heroes where it all ends up being great in the end. Well, that isn't necessarily life. And I think that, again, that's what George explored with the dark and light of aspirational ideas.
It's about good and evil in us, as well as our institutions. So, and the idea that some of us think we're really great people, but in the real world we're not. We're terrible people.
Or you can make bad choices.
Well, you make bad choices, but you run your life in a very selfish way, and you think you're doing good when you're actually not.
And that is the essence of Disney Star Wars. People thinking they're doing good while actually doing evil. This level of betrayal is unforgivable, but it gets worse. In Bob Iger's book, he he talks about George's reaction to being betrayed by both himself and Kennedy. Early on, Kathy brought JJ and Michael Arndt up to Northern California to meet George at his ranch and talk about their ideas for the film. George immediately got upset as they began to describe the plot, and it dawned on him that they weren't using the stories that he had submitted during negotiations. Truth was, Kathy, JJ, Alan, and I had discussed the direction in which the saga should go, and we all agreed that it wasn't what George had outlined. George knew we weren't contractually bound to anything, but he thought that our buying the story treatments was a tacit promise that we'd follow them, and he was disappointed the story was being discarded. I could have talked through this with him and possibly avoided angering him by not surprising him. Now, in the first meeting with him about the future of Star Wars, George felt betrayed. And while the whole process was never going to be easy for him, we'd gotten off to an unnecessarily rocky start. It sounds like Iger felt that if George knew that they'd planned to burn down his life's work, George wouldn't sell Lucasfilm to them. He was probably right.
At the same time, those people who may not play by the rules because they're selfish and greedy turn themselves into evil people who don't care about other people.
Why didn't you see this coming, George? So, Kennedy and her personal minions, the Lucasfilm Story Group, go on to write the first of a new trilogy of films. Supposedly, this would be a continuation of the Skywalker saga that wrapped up in Return of the Jedi. Because, bringing back the original actors and their original roles gets butts in seats.
The main thing is to protect these characters. Make sure that they still continue to live in the way that you created them.
Never mind the fact that they had zero intention of using those characters. As it turns out, the story group couldn't come up with a single original idea, so they decided to remake A New Hope. This is a typical problem when you assemble a squad of political activists and hacks to write your film. Of course, this yielded the normal results, a bad remake of a much better film. Honest Trailer summed this up perfectly.
Gear up for a film so desperate to recapture the magic of the first Star Wars. It practically is the first Star Wars. Featuring a desert orphan finding a cute droid with top secret information, who escapes the Empire thanks to the Millennium Falcon, visits a shady cantina, learns about the Force from a tiny alien, watches a man in black kill her mentor, then helps destroy a Death Star by deactivating a shield generator so that X-Wings can make a trench run.
It's another Death Star.
Oh man.
Tell me they're wrong. Seriously, watch this entire trailer and tell me they're wrong. It is so spot on that it hurts. The link is in the description below. And so, since SJWs can't write a good story to save their lives, we end up with a cowardly deadbeat dad who leaves his wife and kid to go gallivanting around the galaxy with his best friend to find himself or some shit. Not the dashing scoundrel who shoots first and won't leave his friends behind. The beloved character from the original Star Wars trilogy. And, despite all the hype, we only really get to see Han and Chewie in The Force Awakens. We barely see Leia, Luke's a blip, and Lando's not in it at all. So much for mod diversity. They left out the only black guy in the original trilogy. It's almost as if...
Let the past die. Kill it, if you have to.
Shut up, Kylo. The worst part is, they managed to waste the only opportunity they will ever get to reunite the original cast on screen at the same time. You wanted to make some money? That's how you make money. You put Han, Luke, Leia, Lando, Chewie, R2, 3PO, everybody on screen all at the same time, having an adventure together. $2 billion would have just been the start of the take on that movie. The merchandising would have doubled that. They would have made back almost all the money they spent acquiring Lucasfilm in one movie. How can you miss such an obvious answer? There's a huge irony here. Want to guess what it is? It's that the vaulted Lucasfilm Diversity Injection Group, Story Group, is so incompetent that they had to cherry pick the EU to put together a vastly inferior film. 5 times. They did it 5 times. Well, 4.5. Rogue One stuck pretty close to canon. Not Legends, canon. Disney Star Wars is not canon because it completely contradicts canon. Remember what I said about the actors being the same age as their characters in the books? Oh, and how there's hundreds of diverse, well-rounded, and fleshed-out characters to choose from in the EU? Well, instead of using this diverse wealth of beloved, fully developed, and truly awesome characters from the EU, What we got with Disney Star Wars is a grab bag of diversity tokens and no actual characters. Our new heroine is a terrible ripoff of Jaina Solo, forced into a sad parody of Luke Skywalker's story from the original trilogy. And because she's a feminist girl power fantasy token and not an actual character, she's the most Mary Sue of all Mary Sues. So much so that the term Mary Sue should probably just be changed to Rey.
Disney thinks you're such mindless little corporate assets that you'll swallow that Star Wars all along, right from the start, was all about the amazing Wonder Rey, the mostest important Skywalker ever.
Yeah, you said it, Doomcock. Rey is a half-baked girl power version of Jaina Solo. Unlike Rey, Jaina was trained as a Jedi by Luke for many years. She didn't just pop out and know everything the first time she ever saw a lightsaber or boarded a starship. She had to go on multiple missions as a Jedi, fail many times, and learn from her experiences. You know, like real humans do. In the end, she must find the courage to do the unthinkable. She has to convince Boba Fett to train her on how to kill Jedi so that she can confront her more powerful twin brother, who has turned to the dark side, and engage him in a duel that she knows will only end in one or both of their deaths, in order to save the galaxy. The story is heart-wrenching. Contrast this with Rey. She could do it all. She could do it better, and she don't need no man. Or training, because patriarchy. She never meets a challenge she can't instantly overcome. She never doubts herself. She never fails. Oh, and she'll be a dyad, whatever the hell that means. A reference to Jedi twins that they're loosely based on, maybe? I don't know. And I don't care. Speaking of Kylo Ren, the pathetic emo rehash of Jason Solo from the EU, remember how I said that the story group is devoid of original ideas? Well, here's a short history of Jason Solo from the Legacy of the Force novel series, the last big story arc from the EU. It's the same series that I had referenced for Jaina. Keep in mind, this is where the original actors are the same age as the characters in the books as of 2015. Jason Solo, the son of Han Solo and Leia Organa Solo, is trained as a teenager by his uncle, Luke Skywalker, at Luke's Jedi Academy. While training, he is secretly influenced by a powerful Sith who twists his legitimate concerns for the direction of the galaxy into a path to the dark side. Luke, fearing what might happen, tries to talk his nephew down, but is ultimately unsuccessful. In order to prove himself to his dark side mentor, Jason must kill someone very close to him, so he murders his aunt and mentor, Mara Jade. Now, Jason, due to his fame in a recent war, rises in power in the government, eventually causing it to fracture and takes control of the bulk of the government, turning the remaining part into a rebel faction of sorts and touching off a galactic civil war. Luke, now certain that Jason can't be saved, knows he must be taken down. But Luke can't bring himself to kill his own blood, so Jason's sister, Jaina, has to do it instead. Sound familiar? It should. The big difference between Kylo Ren and Jason, besides the emo nonsense, is that Jason was an active protagonist. He didn't spend 3 whole films following one MacGuffin after another, doing someone else's bidding. Jason rose to power by his own doing. He took charge. He was active. This is vital to a good character, especially your villain and hero. They need to be active in making the story happen, not just floating along. This is basic storytelling 101, and the story group hacks couldn't even get that part right with a blueprint to follow. Next, we get the stereotypical token black man, Finn. Granted, the concept of a stormtrooper breaking his conditioning and escaping the First Order is the most interesting character setup of the whole garbage dump of a trilogy, but that's never explored. It's also not an original idea. You should go read the Republic Commandos series of novels from the EU if you really want to see how this concept plays out. So instead of exploring this very interesting character concept to its ultimate conclusion, Finn gets relegated to spending 3 films chasing Rey around and generally being a doofus played for laughs. You deserve so much better, Finn. And then we get Poe, the token Hispanic. His character arc begins and ends with being a cocky pilot. That's it. That's his whole development over 3 films. Next we have the First Order, a Wile E. Coyote parody of the Empire with all the intimidation factor of a room full of preschoolers and a pillow fight. Kennedy and Jar Jar were clearly trying to make them a bigger threat than the Empire of old, but they just turned into a laughable parody of Nazi propaganda. General Hux, please. That twit didn't command a potato-peeling squad, let alone develop stormtrooper brainwashing and training programs. He gives a good speech, though. Goebbels would be proud. So here we are, 5 years later. Disney has turned out one disappointing shit show after another by selectively cherry-picking and stealing from the vastly superior EU. Fall of Skywalker is about to come out, and Kathleen Kennedy decides this would be a great time to do a PR interview. She uses this interview with Rolling Stone to try to excuse away her continual failures. And wait till you hear what her excuse is. Every one of these movies is a particularly hard nut to crack. There's no source material. We don't have comic books. We don't have 800-page novels. Hold up. Stop right there. I think I smell something.
That is one big pile of shit.
Yeah, that's it. Bullshit. Hey, Kathy, let me direct you to literally everything in this video up to this point. Sure, there aren't any 800-page novels, but what about hundreds of 400-page novels? Can you work with that? By now, pretty much everyone knows you can't really adapt an 800-page book to a 2-hour movie anyway. It's too much material to cover. It would end up being a cocaine-fueled shotgun mess. Kinda like Fall of Skywalker, actually. No, an 800-page novel would be a mini-series. See Game of Thrones, Winds of War, War and Peace, The Stand, and many other examples. Stop lying. You're a glorified secretary and a failure. You don't have a creative bone in your body, and it's as obvious as the sun in the sky. Just admit it like D&D, and we can all move along to getting you replaced with someone competent. Someone like me, for example. It's time you got fired, and I got your job. We don't have anything other than passionate storytellers who get together and talk about what the next iteration may be. Newsflash, you still don't. You don't have a single competent storyteller in your entire story group. The evidence is obvious. You've shown it all to the world for 5 years. Your falling revenues have proven it for 5 years. The new Lucasfilm sucks at storytelling, which was always George's greatest strength. Hence the rumors that George might be coming back to save your butt. So, what should Disney have done if you really wanted to make money from Star Wars and keep the fans coming back for more? What could they have done to expand the already huge fan base? Well, tune into my next video where I lay out the Star Wars trilogy that should have been.